I'm Carmine Gallo, and today we're going to talk about stories that will inspire you to achieve greatness. Not only that, we'll also mention and talk about why you should read such stories and tell such stories. Stories of heroes. Alexander Hammond is the author of Heroes of Progress, 65 People Who Changed the World. Alexander, thank you for compiling these very inspiring stories. And some by some unheralded individuals whose stories should be told. Nice job.
Thank you very much for having me on. Yes, many of the heroes are very unsung indeed, and I look forward to exploring some of them with you.
I'd like to start with a quote from the foreword to your book, which is by Steven Pinker. His book, Enlightenment Now, one of my favorite books and a real life-changing book. I've had the pleasure of interviewing Steven Pinker, so I'm glad he wrote the foreword. It's actually very, very well written and beautiful foreword to your book. But he says that history is full of individuals who have defied the odds and transformed countless lives for the better. And he's speaking, of course, about some of the scientists, inventors, writers who you profile in Heroes of Progress. Why are those stories critical to continued progress?
So there's quite a few reasons for that, in my opinion. And the first is, without knowing the stories of these great innovators and on whose shoulders the modern world really rests, it's impossible to then subsequently analyze the socioeconomic conditions that drove their progress and led to their innovations. If we didn't know that the rate of innovation has significantly increased in the last couple of centuries, as the world became freer, then perhaps free societies become less important to us. If we don't know that often quite disagreeable people who process information on a level that isn't suited to charming conversations are usually actually very innovative and create products that help humanity as a whole sometimes, then perhaps those people are less tolerated. And I could go on.
Yeah, I agree. I understand. Any effective leader today knows that innovation is a team sport. It's the result of people working together, collaboration. Why single out individuals?
Well, fundamentally, as the Maryland University economist and former senior fellow of the Cato Institute, Julian Simon, noted, the human mind is the ultimate resource. It is unique in its ability to create new ideas. Machines, at least not yet, organizations, governments, groups do not create ideas. It is fundamentally an individual endeavor. And I've defined a hero of progress to be someone whose work has saved or improved millions of lives. And I'm really looking for the direct link here. You're completely right that innovation is usually quite incremental, it's collective, it's built on centuries or even millennia of acquired knowledge. But for simplicity's sake, I only included those who played the clearest and most important role in directly creating an innovation that has changed society. Because there's also a question of how far back do you go? I mean, if I'm crediting, say, David Narlin, who created the formula for oral rehydration therapy, do I mention every single person on his team? Perhaps I should. But then do I also mention the people who created the test tubes and the instruments that made his formula possible, the people who developed the building materials that his lab was built from, it made him in a nice, cozy environment to do his work? So there is definitely this... I had to just make some discretion, but really fundamentally, I'm looking at the person who played the clearest and most important impact. And sometimes that's why innovations that have changed the world, the aeroplane, the automobile, have actually been not included in this book because the history of their creation involves so many people that I simply don't have the time or the resources to write a biography of every single person. And it's impossible to kind of look at the entire history of humanity and rank order everyone's vet everyone's achievements and see which ones are the most significant. So some
I
discretion
understand.
had to be taken.
Well, some of my favorite stories, and there's 65 exceptional stories of heroes. One of my favorite heroes, partly because I'm a writer, and so to me it's kind of obvious why you start as the first person in your book, is Johannes Gutenberg, the inventor of the printing press. Connect the dots for people. How did the printing press advance progress, and not just a little, exponentially?
Fundamentally, I think dispersed knowledge has been a historic game changer to humanity's progress. Having ample books, which, of course, when the first print was invented, it wasn't quite the case. There'd be dozens of books everywhere, but it started a process that created more and more and more printing presses across Europe and then the rest of the world. And this fueled at least the later part of the Renaissance, the Reformation, the scientific revolution, and then also the Enlightenment, which those things I just mentioned are the pillar for most ideas, the vast majority of policies, virtually all the technological breakthroughs of the modern world thus far. So, and this completely makes sense. Innovation is dependent on human minds, and having as many human minds as we can look at a problem creates really cool, innovative solutions. So before the printing press, books were very scarce. Maybe you'd see one or two in your entire lifetime. Whereas now we're in such an abundance that anyone across the world can pick them up, learn, think, and then potentially have an idea and then act on that idea if they have the necessary freedoms to then create a marketable product that can potentially change the world.
Another one of my favorites is Frederick Douglass, the abolitionist, former slave who secretly taught himself to read and write. And his writing, of course, is well known. It's incredibly eloquent. But one of the things that you write about in this book, which I sort of knew, but you made it very clear, is that Frederick Douglass became a preacher, and that's how he honed his public speaking skills. And so it wasn't just the writing, it was the speaking as well. Now that speaks to me as a communication coach, because I believe that fundamentally that writing and public speaking and effective communication are critical for heroes and pioneers and inventors to get their ideas out there. Persuasion is an essential ingredient of innovation. Would you agree?
So I think it really depends on the hero and the innovation we're talking about. With Frederick Douglass, it's true when he became a preacher and he got to practice giving public speaking almost every day of his life. And we see this today, like if you ever talk to a teacher or a university lecturer who spends the majority of their day presenting and talking to people, they are usually incredibly eloquent and can really quite control a room if they wanted to. So that is really important if we're talking about innovations that really persuaded the masses. Another example could be William Wilberforce in his effort to end slavery in the British Empire, which subsequently caused a domino effect across the world. He gave speeches in Parliament and across the United Kingdom that were just staggering, and people really pinned the entire policy change, the ending of slavery, something that has been around for all of humanity's history, to him. So it's incredibly important.
Yeah, that's chapter 11 in your book, William Wilberforce. And what's interesting, the reason why I love this book is because I have not read his speeches. I've not read his writing. So you pick up on a lot of heroes that I don't think are on everyone's radar, and they should be read.
Well, I think they should be, well, the majority of them should be well-known household names, if not all of them. Personally, I find it a bit absurd we celebrate the people we celebrate in society, and the fact that most people don't know who Norman Borlaug is, who saved over 1 billion lives thanks to his hybrid wheat crop.
Well, look, I didn't learn about Norman Borlaug until I started working with people in the agricultural space. So it was through agriculture and learning from farmers and experts in agriculture about Norman Borlaug's innovation, seed innovation. And how he has saved so many lives now because of the food innovations and the grain innovations that he created. So sometimes it's just, kind of stumbling upon these people in different ways. But there are many who should be taught. Look, modern day feminists, women should be celebrating two women who you have in the same chapter, Mary Estelle and Mary Wollstonecraft. Right. They are widely considered pioneers of feminist philosophy. And I think people forget, they probably know now through movies like Pride and Prejudice and others, that women in the 17th and 18th centuries, especially in Western Europe, not treated very well. And so these two Marys were radical at the time. And yet when you read what they were proposing, it was that, women are just as smart as men and they should have equal opportunity. At the time, that was heretic. They were heretics. It was radical. It's amazing to read some of these stories and how much courage it actually took at certain times to express your ideas.
Absolutely. And women in the 17th and 18th century were virtually treated as property of the father or the husband. However, this is very much, when we talk about like Pride and Prejudice and looking how women were treated then, it was still very much the case that virtually every single man in society in the 17th and 18th century was treated dreadfully, had virtually no rights too. And if we went back a couple hundred years prior, if we're talking about the 13th or 12th century, anywhere in the world, most people had no rights, had no privileges, and we were all kind of slugging through it together. But it is true of men in the 17th and 18th that when men began to have more rights, women didn't. And Mary Estelle and Mary Wollstonecraft really paved the way for feminist ideologies as we know it, and feminism in the sense that the sexes are equal rather than alternative definitions.
But these are people who should be celebrated and taught as heroes, and a lot of people don't know them. I came across a number of names that I doubt most people know, and yet when you read their stories, they should be celebrated. Who are one of your more interesting stories that you profiled?
I definitely can't say I have favorites. The book is a bit of a baby to me. But one person I find really interesting, partly because of how unsung he is a guy called Maurice Hilleman. And he was an American medical scientist who, it's been said, saved more lives than any other medical scientist in the 20th century.
Vaccines, right?
That's correct. He created in his lifetime 40 vaccines, 40 vaccines. Of the current schedules recommended to people, of the 14, he created about 8 of them. Absolutely really important guy, but very unknown, and perhaps unknown for a couple of reasons. And one is, it's quite common, even though we have people like Frederick Douglass, William Wilberforce, Richard Cobden, who are incredibly eloquent and can communicate to huge crowds very effectively. It seems that Maurice Hilleman was not like that at all. He was very disagreeable. He kind of, according to one of his mentees...
This gentleman?
That's right.
Okay, tell me more about him. What do you mean by disagreeable?
By disagreeable, so fundamentally disagreeableness is a personality trait, which is what it says on the tin, that usually it means it's slightly more difficult to get along with people. They kind of go against the normal trends. But with Maurice Hilleman, just as an example of his disagreeableness, he, in his lab that he ran, he had a row of shrunken heads on the table to symbolize all of the fired employees that couldn't make the cut in his lab. They were later found out to be fake and actually made by his children, which is quite sweet, but outwardly extremely quite aggressive. He refused to take classes mandated by his employers to make middle managers more civil and more nice to their employees. A mentee of his said he ran his lab like a military unit. So ultimately, a really disagreeable guy. And this is where, with your emphasis on communication and the importance of it, which I completely agree, also there seems to be this kind of paradox where for some innovations, especially when it involves changing people's minds, the ability to communicate is extremely important, and to get on stage and influence thousands of people. Communication is key. But then there's also this other type of innovation which involves you almost being relentless in your work. Often in the book, it could be in a lab or in a maybe a home garage, creating your product, relentless and testing it thousands of times. And despite what other people tell you, saying it's not going to work, you're crazy. Wilhelm Röntgen is one of the heroes. He was told he was crazy when he said he could take photos of the insides of people's bodies. And yet X-rays today are like a mainstay of the medical community. And I'm sure most listeners have benefited from them. So, however, I should say with the quite disagreeable heroes, they did manage, I really think they did manage to inspire confidence because of their work ethic and how tenacious they were towards their work. And that helped inspire a community around them. So it's, I wouldn't say it's the best approach to leadership, but it can be an effective one, it seems.
Over the past 200 years, humanity has experienced unprecedented progress. Between 1820 and 2020, the proportion of people living in extreme poverty fell from 95% to less than 9.5%. Over the same period, as you write, average global life expectancy more than doubled from 29 years to 73 years. Why is it that there are so many people today who, despite this level of progress and advance, still have very high levels of anxiety, distress, and some surveys point to despair? Not among people living in war-torn countries or countries that are under economic collapse, but in Western democracies, or people have the opportunity to go to college in an air-conditioned room with flushing toilets. Why this despair given the data?
And that really is the golden question. For many years, and at least a decade, there's been this kind of, I call it the new optimist movement. It's groups like humanprogress.org. It's Johan Norberg with his books like Progress. It's Steven Pinker with his books like Enlightenment Now.
I think I have all of them, yes. And I visit humanprogress.org every week.
As you should. Very good. And Matt Ridley with his Rational Optimist that partly inspired a lot of the subsequent works. And yet we've been pitching this, I say we as the kind of a movement have been pitching this for about 10, if not a bit more years. And yet everyone remains pessimistic and skeptical about the state of the world. Any polls that you ask people how they think the world is getting, the vast majority, almost regardless of at least the Western country they're looking at, says the world is getting worse. And this isn't just a case of people isn't just a silly case of people not knowing the data because they haven't looked at the World Bank Data Bank latest report. It's fundamentally a lot more than that, and it's really impacting society as a whole and mental health. Just to give one example, according to a 2022 survey, one third of Americans and half of all Americans under 30 reported feeling anxious all or most of the time. People fundamentally aren't aware of the immense progress that has come before or what has caused that progress. There is, and I don't like using this word, but there is an ignorance about what has come before and what causes this. And this is what really inspired me to write the book. The book, I hope, is my humble contribution to trying to champion human ingenuity, to show that humanity can overcome extremely unfavorable odds, and that human innovation, which is caused by freedom, the human mind, and the belief that you can make a difference, is truly fundamental to global prosperity and progress going forward. And despite what we face, we can overcome it.
We need to hear those stories. We need to read those stories of heroes of progress, and we need to share those stories. Alex, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.